Okay, so let's remove the LinkedIn one. Yep, save changes. Okay, so I think we're live. I'm gonna double check with the people who are not watching on my computer and watching on someone else's. Um, but for everybody who might be watching us in this moment, welcome to another round of dialogue with Equal Playing Field and all of the amazing men and women we've been able to put together in this insane world record time. I've just been given an update by our colleagues in Bahrain watching Dina. She's closing in on the 5,000 penalty kicks taken already, and that it really just begs the question: what were the other people doing with the other 12 hours of their day? She'd broken the record for 12 hours of a 24-hour time frame, but also clearly a result of good planning and a lot of teamwork behind the scenes to have rounds of ball girls and boys, and food and water brought to the field on hourly intervals. I think that's been pretty awesome to see. For people who don't know me, I actually don't spend as much time on the social media space from Equal Playing Field. My name is Erin. I am one of the founders for the organization, and it was a brainchild of a 3 a.m. phone call between myself and Laura. She had one of those days or one of those weeks or one of those months at work where you're just like, I can't handle this anymore. I need a project. I need a goal. I need something that I can fix and something that I can really give voice to these frustrations. And as usual, I was like, oh yeah, I'm in. Kely, sure, let's figure that out. We know enough crazy people to potentially say yes to something like that, and watching it manifest and grow for the last 3 years has been really, really fun. But I like to tend to hand over a lot of the public speaking to Laura and Maggie because I think they're much better at it than I am. But at this moment, I'm super grateful to be able to welcome Susie Petrucelli and Kely Nascimento-DeLuca to help us talk through celebrate Dina as she continues on this quest. She's got another 10 hours to go, but to actually take a chance to reflect a bit on the themes that we've been talking about. What I feel really fortunate here is to be with storytellers. And I think that's something that's been really powerful in the transition of women's sport, and honestly, the gender equality movement over the last several decades has been how important that voice through the different mediums has been on screen, in print, on the airwaves, to have someone there who you trust to tell your story and to tell the story the right way, and to make sure that the messages and the values that you have fought so fiercely for as an athlete, as an individual, as a representative of your communities and the various communities that you represent, but to have individuals who are passionate about telling the right stories and being able to get it out there. So we are super fortunate in this moment to have these two warriors, and I will use that word deliberately, based on the work that they have been putting together for the last several years. And with that, I guess for those of us who don't know Equal Playing Field, we are a grassroots organization that really focuses on the gender equality question in and through sport. Traditionally, we focus on football and soccer because that's where most of us who initially came together were collected. That was our team, that was our sport, but it has been growing in space since then. And the important elements of the dialogue and the mandate and the niche that we wanted to fill was really about understanding equality. And what do we mean when we say gender equality in and through sport? What are we really trying to stand for? What are we advocating for? What are we trying to help people reach? And when we boiled it down in our brainstorming sessions over coffees and beers and glasses of wine and all of the other fuels of the fire out there, it was, what are we talking about? What do we want? Opportunity, equality, and respect. Nothing more, nothing less. This is not asking for handouts, not asking for special treatment, asking for fundamental shift in how we understand equality and how it's applied to girls and women. And so you guys both come with a really diverse and interesting background. I think it would be great for all the people out there to have a chance to think about those values, right? Opportunity, equality, respect. How do we interpret them? What has it been in your experiences, what you've seen, and just give us some insights on that. And whoever wants to start, jump on in.
I'll jump in, and I'll just talk about. So I grew up playing soccer in Southern California, and I was lucky. As I grow up, I realize more and more how lucky I was to have so many opportunities to play soccer in so many different levels. I started when I was 5. My dad was my coach. I did play 1 year with the boys, but after that, I played on girls' teams my entire life, including an Olympic development program in the United States. And then I played at Harvard. So, for me, in terms of sports, it all seemed very equal for a long time. I didn't start to pick up on the inequalities until I got older. They were always there. In my case, they were subtle. They were things like, actually, now that I'm going to say it, it doesn't sound so subtle, but it was subtle at the time. My dad saying that he wasn't going to give his company to a girl, things like that. There were more, gender inequalities around me, but they didn't really all sort of click together till I was in my 20s. Because I wasn't allowed to play football or baseball, but I was allowed to play soccer, so I forgot about that. I think when I was in my 20s and I started to realize how, girls were outside the United States, and even some girls in the United States don't have the same opportunities that I had. It all kind of came together, and I started to wake up and realize that, there's a lot of work to do. We still have a lot of work to do. And that's how I luckily got to meet Kely. And Q.
So, wow, it's such a hugely broad subject matter, right? I have to say that I come from a country of soccer, and I come from a family of soccer, completely, right? Brothers, cousins, uncles, my dad, everyone, mostly men. Right. Growing up, I did not, I'm going to be honest with you. I think it's such a different mindset, and it's an amazing thing that for another whole other program, right? The difference between sort of the global perception of gender inequality and of racism, right? Because gender inequality is much more sort of accepted as part of the culture, whereas racism is absolutely part of a culture, but it's also something that people don't want to be associated with, even if they are racist. So it's I don't know which one's better, which one's worse. I don't think it is. I think it's just important to understand them when you're trying to sort of make any kind of change. So, and I say that because I didn't really, until I got much older, notice much of the gender inequality, probably because it didn't pertain to me, only because, but also because I, like Susie said, they were big things that I was just used to being a fact of life. Right. And nobody was really fighting against, and then nobody seemed very perturbed by, right? I didn't grow up with any, we didn't have a lot of people around us all the time because it was very odd sort of, at least when we lived in Brazil. But even the people that I did know, I didn't have any female friends who were dying to play soccer for me to notice the disparity, right? So until I started getting older. I also think that the socioeconomic disparities really exacerbate every other kind of inequality, right? Because I think that it's sort of the first hurdle before you're able to actually talk about gender. So, but I would say that, like Susie said, the inequality is just as prevalent here in Queens, right? As it is in many places. And I think the thing that makes it, more obvious and more, I guess, blatant is definitely the social issues, right? And poverty. I would say I first started noticing it, I think when I began to, when I moved to the States, really, because I think women's soccer here is a women's game. Even my brother says it when he was younger. It was a girls' game. He's Brazilian, and his dad is Pele, but he grew up in New York. And
it's a hard tier to break into.
And he played hockey. He played baseball. He played, he loved hockey, which is basically soccer on ice. He played, not really good. He played football, but soccer was a girls' game, he thought at the time. So it's wonderful for women because I think, the one thing that it doesn't do is you don't have to cross that like sort of predetermined barrier, right? That it belongs to. So I think that's the first time I started noticing it, when I started noticing that in Brazil there were no girl soccer players, that I knew.
Wait,
Yeah, and
are you talking about Edson, or are you talking about Malcolm?
No, my brother.
Oh wow, okay, that's really interesting. Okay.
Now, not at all, right? Now it's completely, my brother would, my son would never even think that.
Right.
But yeah.
Right. Now the timing is really interesting, and I think I've spent most of my time living abroad, but there are a couple of things from the U.S. that I hold very dearly to. And Title IX was it. If someone is asking me for like, what are the best things about the United States, right? I've lived and worked in about 80 countries, so there is lived, worked, or traveled in, right? And everyone's like, look, national park system, Declaration of Independence, Title IX. Those are my big three. Those, if you want to look at sort of constitutional, legal-based values that I think really speak to what I am most proud about and what I most cherish in sort of like the American or North American system is the idea that Title IX was there. And I think that one of the reasons that soccer, football was a women's game is because schools were looking at ways to make up the budget deficit, right?
Absolutely.
So many women's sports were single athlete sports, right? So like, how can we spend enough on tennis in order to get the same number of girls being supported in sports programs as having a baseball team or an American football team, et cetera. And what I have seen is that, when given the opportunity, girls seize it and they double down, and there was such a rapid change and evolution in the game and the caliber of the players and the following through like post Title IX that also was able to spill over into other sports. But it was soccer became really a vehicle that brought us all along, right? It is the world's game for many reasons. 5 billion people on the planet follow it one way or another. But there's also something that's really potent about that capacity to shift a culture that we've seen.
It's also, it was, there wasn't that hurdle of having sort of any sort of cultural ownership of soccer here, right? It was kind of like it was a free for all that women were allowed to seize on right at that moment, right? That was like a perfect confluence of,
It wasn't ruffling anybody's feathers for girls to play soccer.
It was the immigrant game. It's like, take it.
Forget that, right? And I spent a lot of time working in developing war-torn countries and the concept of opportunity, right? And what are the chances that I have had that they don't? How can we make what they do have work for them? Has been seizing on sort of that little micro space where if you're not competing with somebody else for that same thing, you might get away with it a little bit more. You might get a little bit more momentum. It's okay to own it. It's okay to dig into that a bit, where that just isn't the case in a lot of other sports or contexts. There's certainly different times in history that we've seen so far.
It's also I think it's an amazing sort of little study, right? That I was in during the World Cup. I was doing this little ceremony to open up this girls team in Reims in France, right? It was right after the U.S. played Thailand. Okay. That first game, And I was standing at a table after it, which was very cool. And then, it was actually an academy. It was a really sweet academy, and they were starting a semi-professional girls team. And the academy was all children. And afterwards, I'm standing at this little stand-up table with some champagne and like 3 or 4 men in their 70s. And they're talking amongst themselves about how amazing the U.S. women are. And how they play like the men, like it's a really competitive game. It's really a pleasure to watch. And it's interesting that people, and I spoke up, right? And I said, well, it's because the U.S. women have been playing this game. So, they get to
for 40 years now.
When they're 5, they get to play in teams. They get to, they play constantly. And it's interesting how that's missed, right? How,
why are they so much better?
In football right now in the world. And, it directly correlates with the amount of time they get to play. And it's so simple. You know what I mean? And so how early they start and how much, just the ownership of the game they get to have. And it's missed. It's constantly missed. And I think it's something that really it's important for us to keep reminding people, like, it's not magic,
I think it goes back also to what Erin was saying about Title IX, right? Because Title IX made it possible for girls to get scholarships, sports scholarships, to college, right? And so once girls could get a scholarship to play soccer, there were a ton of dads that were okay with their girls playing soccer.
Yeah, you can play. Yep, that is a worthwhile
they
way to
started
spend your time.
investing in the sport because they knew the investment was going to pay off because their kids were going to get an education. And I think that's one of the things that's still missing outside the United States. And it actually drove, and also the equality in the, Division I programs between the boys programs and the girls programs is pretty equal for the most part.
Yeah.
It's not fully equal yet. We know the Title IX numbers, the proportionalities are not perfect yet, but it's a lot better than where it was, and it's a lot better than, anywhere else.
Although I do feel like in countries like Brazil, Italy, some of the countries that really have an ownership to football, I don't know that it would be as, like, for example, we have amazing, world-renowned volleyball players that are women.
Yeah.
Right. I don't know if something like Title IX would fix the sort of the pre-existing taboo of having women possibly do really well in a game that's a man's game, right? Like the fear of that is such that in every other sport may develop and not soccer.
I think that's a really great insight on sort of like the fear factor of like, what happens if they are so much better? What happens if this makes it so clearly public and undeniable that we have to fundamentally change our structures, our system, our funding mechanisms, the way we approach sort of the whole culture of sport in these different countries. And this is, and I think it's a question that I think about a lot, is like, does Title IX, does the idea that you have an institutional norm that is enforceable by law and backed by budgets, is that something that could be transferable to other contexts? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. I think that going back to what you were saying, Kely, about how systematic inequality is something that is much deeper than just women in sport, right? There's a lot of other things that are there, but I would like to see us try anyway. I would like us to start testing those modalities, right? Yeah. And one of the conversations I have with a lot of my male friends that I play football with, because I work in war zones, generally not a lot of options for female teams. So I play with the men's teams, and they're like, God, like, if you're a good female footballer, you're probably on the national team. And I was like, right, but that means you have to be one of 30 women in your entire country, for most of the countries on this planet, to be not only good enough to play, but you have to come from the right cities, the right family, have the right sort of background, culture, appreciate, like, you can be so. And
even then, right, the stars have to align.
And
like the gods have to still, it's like insane.
Do your ACL in the wrong moment, right? Yeah. The wrong moment of a long career, or a potentially long career, and that changes your trajectory. Right. So whereas in the men's game, or I would argue with most men's sport, like, the competition to play in the national team is very, very high, but you always have an opportunity to play. There's a million other leagues and divisions and grassroots teams and clubs that you at least get to play. Whereas on the women's side, for the vast majority of women who play, that's just not the reality, because there's none of that middle pathways, right? And I think that's one of those things to think again about equality is like, what are the development opportunities, not just access, but you can come in as an 8-year-old and play football, but then maybe by the time you're 12, that's it, right? Because most of the investment that we see in the women's game frequently focuses on youth, which is good, but so there's like the top level tier, and then there's the grassroots level entry point, and then all of those pieces in the middle, which is where you really have to start unpacking those more systemic barriers, access to resources, access to fields, access to safe transport, safe spaces, coaches, all of those things that are sort of your bottlenecks for these different stages in playing, I think is something we still really need to think about a bit more.
And that's what I think, like Laiz and the protagonist of the documentary that we're doing, one of the things that her story really sheds light on is what you're saying, is that regardless of how the lack of equity in the trajectory for men, and countries, like for example, pay for play here, we can spend an hour on that, and how, not everyone's going to get to the national team, and we can tell you pretty much who's going to get, possibly get there. But however sort of unfair, unequal, or how much work it needs, there's a trajectory. So what Laisa's story illustrates is that it literally took possibly the most determined and absolutely bullheaded, diligent person I've ever met, and like a handful of daily miracles, this child to get to where she is, which is a brilliant story. Is going to make an amazing movie, but is not replicable in any way. Like there's nothing about it that you can take and say, and like another girl can learn from. Say, oh, this is what I should do. You know what I mean? Or this is where I should go. And that's all. That's a huge problem.
Yeah, I mean, I know in the United States, when I was growing up, there was a pathway, right? The pathway was this Olympic development program, which I think has pretty much at this point been dismantled. That the system is completely different now. Even if there was a system, it's also part of the problem is adapting the system, changing the system. Being willing to reinvest in the system. I know here in the U.S., obviously, on the men's side, they're really struggling with the development pathway, it's pay for play. It's just what you were saying. There's not enough elite level clubs, and it's exclusive. Completely exclusive. So if and I know that in England, right, the and most of Europe, right, the pathway is the club system, right? So it's a completely different system. But obviously it seems to be working better there than anything that we have going on here.
Yeah, and it's funny because that obviously wouldn't be the initial instinct, right? And that, oh wait, you've had a couple extra decades to work on this. You're a very, very, very competitive, strong, sort of gold standard setting team approach, et cetera, to women's team sport. Interesting how quickly Europe is catching up in that space, and just being able to be at the World Cup last summer and watch those games, and I just floored, right? Just utterly floored at the quality of the game. And I don't think I've been to 5 World Cups now. I generally take these life sabbaticals about every 4 to 5 years. I quit my job. I go to wherever the World Cup is. I travel until I run out of money, and then I start over. And it's great. I've been able to, with time, create a very reasonable justification and like, oh, this is a very wise, thoughtful process. No, I'm a nomad deep down, and I really like to just be around work quite a bit. But being at that field, and the moment that the final whistle blows, to have the entire stadium erupt with just the most clear demand for equal pay. Yeah. That is just, I don't know. I've never been at a tournament where I have felt like the social conscious of everybody who was there was so on point, right? That the dialogue, that they understood they were part of something bigger. And like you were saying, Kely, before, you're like just listening to these old men, it's like, oh, this is great football. And listening, I'm getting stuck at one of the many random places they would position you in France, waiting to be allowed to move. You'd just be sort of thrown into these groups of people. And I have never seen older men argue so passionately about players that up and even until the tournament I'd never heard of before, right? And I actually follow the women's game, but to be just ardent about, and have followed their career, and be able to refer back, well, when they were playing in college, this is what their strengths were, but I like what they've done here. And I was in awe the whole time that there was a recognition, a global recognition moment of not that we're done yet, but there is a belief and a momentum there that I don't think is turning back. And Europe seems to have really seized on that.
Well, that's what I was going to say, right? And it's very, watching the whole thing from our perspective, it's pretty simple to see why and how they're doing it, right? They seized on, maybe not as early as we would have liked, but they've clearly identified a growth potential. Right. And they've thrown everything at it, right? I mean, their stations, their prime time, their media, it's pretty it's pretty incredible. And I remember, you know, I used to live in France, and I remember for most of my life, and I do think that this is true. Culturally, they're not as much of a sporty society as we are, right? Like I spent like 5 days in Marseille, you know, desperately looking for a paddleboard.
So hard.
I'm like, who do I have to tell to get a paddleboard? Meanwhile, any body of water in the United States, there's like 15,000 paddleboards and like canoes. Yeah. So how do they manage to sort of flip this, where, you know, we're the reigning queens of soccer, and all of a sudden we're quickly becoming, you know, playing catch up, you know? And I still feel, I still feel like I don't see a lot in the United States in terms of seizing this moment, you know, and becoming more competitive. And, you know, I see a lot of still, like, you know, so whenever a lot of the NWSL players went over to Europe, a lot of the titles were like losing another one, or, you know what I mean? There was this sort of join the movement kind of feel, or vernacular, you know, that I was hoping to see, or rhetoric, you know? Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, I think part of that is still in the United States, you know, even men's soccer, right? It butts up against the TV time, the primetime TV for football and baseball. And those are big barriers, you know. I think those are big barriers for women and men's soccer. You know, the people that are in decision-making roles, and the way the money flows in American sports media, you know, it still doesn't flow to any kind of soccer, really. So,
you know, do you think that, like, I don't know enough about that, but, and I want to let you go on, but with the amount of streaming services that we have now, and the amount, I mean, I don't even feel like unless you're like, you know, unless you're older than 55, there is no prime time anymore. So how is that not fixed?
If you think, like, you know, Red Zone on you know, for the NFL on Sundays, and like my family still very much revolves around like sitting down on Sunday and not missing that Red Zone period. Like it's built into our family schedule, you know. And there's nothing like that yet. For soccer.
Do you think the demographic of women and men and young men that watch soccer really are like are that, you know, are that demographic?
I think that demographic is still missing here. Yeah. I mean, obviously, I mean, we get up in the morning and watch the EPL in the morning, in the mornings. But I think, you know, in terms of like a bigger audience here for soccer, I think we're still you know, so far behind. And I think there are actual like barriers to that. Like people are trying to not let soccer have a bigger, you know.
Absolutely. I think there's a lot of deliberate decision making and sort of value judgments that have been made around what I think some people would call like the non-traditional American sport, right? And I think soccer sits in this really interesting middle ground, and that it is when the women's national soccer team plays, the country turns to it, right? Like there is an absolute yes. This is it. This is what we're proud of. This represents us. We follow it. We care about it. But once you filter down into, because, you know, like you were saying, even with MLS, it's still a little bit of a demographic challenge. And one of the things that I found quite interesting, and is perhaps a challenge based on the way that American culture sort of centers around basketball, baseball, and American football, basically, is that it has been an increasing pressure over years for kids to become single sport athletes.
Yeah.
Right. You guys are both moms. And so, and I'd love to get your perspective on this. Is I was a multi-sport athlete growing up. I never did fewer than 3 sports at once. I think it's one of the reasons I was mostly injury free the majority of all of my careers. But that is not really the case anymore. Like the sense of competitiveness, and the fact that, you know, at 12 years old, you're asking kids to put in hours, you know, and dedicate entire years of their life to giving up other sports to only focus on one, to have a singular trajectory of acceptable success in that sport. And with the financial system, the way that it is now for being rewarded as a professional athlete, if you're a good athlete, you tend to drift, right? You tend to drift toward, at least on the men's side, you tend to drift towards the sport that where there is the most institutional cultural resource support in place. I think there's a lot of psychological issues to that as well, but I think it's really interesting in that soccer for a while had sort of owned its own special space because of the women's game and because of also the young demographic that was really loved the game, followed international soccer. This is what they really, it was sort of like the alternative space. And now it's like halfway in. So you've got like the X Games version of alternative sports and speed climbing and, you know, all of these other things versus the traditional like triple crown, I guess, of traditional American sports. And where this filters into the global conversation is that the money available in U.S. sport is still, it still sort of swamps everything else, right? So it sort of sets a tone, I think, in a way that in the media space and sort of like the broader cultural conversation, this might be one of the reasons that we've dropped off a little bit, because we've hit a point now where for the men's and women's game, but for soccer itself to really start to push and start reclaiming some of that territory, the public territory from football, baseball, basketball, they're dealing with incredibly robust structures that are deliberately designed to make sure that not a lot of other people can come in there. And I think it's been really sad to look at, you know, nieces and nephews of mine are like, oh, I blew my ACL 3 times by the time I was 17, so I can't do this anymore because this was the only sport that I was, you know, that I thought I could do. I don't know. Have you seen that?
Absolutely. I think Susie can speak more to it, but I'll just bring you back to how I said that my brother used to play hockey, football, and baseball pretty competitively. I mean, actually, because he moved to Brazil when he was younger, I have cases of his trophies in my basement, which I do not have room for.
So this is a shout out, come to your stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And my son would never be able to do that. The demands on him for soccer alone, like the only thing he can manage, which he loves, is flag football because it's not super competitive. So it defers to the schedule of the other sports. But I find that and actually I'm going to let Susie, because Susie has I think she can speak to this most, but I find it extremely sad. It makes me so sad how competitive it's become. It makes me so sad to sit on the sidelines and hear other parents for like a 3rd grade soccer game, what they're doing, you know. But also I think that this competitiveness is the reason we rally as a nation behind the women is because they win without much effort from the nation and from this. Right? So if the men won World Cups, I'm sure soccer would become very popular. The men's soccer would be too, right? I think they did that first without a lot of help from, structurally, and now they're super popular. But you know what I mean? So I think it has to do also with that competitiveness.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Susie.
No, so I didn't play any other sport besides soccer, only because I was the youngest of 4, and I think my parents just could only handle getting me to one sport, and it didn't.
So many fields we can get to.
Yeah,
geography.
It didn't even seem like there were other sports available to me at that time. I'm sure there were, and actually, Kely knows we got to interview Billie Jean King a year and a half ago or so. And she grew up in a town that's not very far away. She grew up in Long Beach. I grew up in South Pasadena. And we were talking about this issue of multi-sport athletes, and my feeling at the time was that she was going to agree with me that agree with what you were saying, that it's better for kids to play more sports and they're specializing too early. And she just looked at us and she said, actually, I don't think that they'll ever get to the top if they don't specialize very early. And I was sort of like, well, actually, now I do see it from that perspective. But obviously, there's 2 tracks. Are you playing for recreation? Are you playing for fun? Are you playing for health and well-being and the lessons that you can learn on the sports field? Or are you trying to turn it into a profession? And are you trying to get, are you trying to become a professional athlete? So there's obviously, 2 different.
But that's the thing, I think, Susie. Sorry to interrupt you. Is that there are no people playing for pleasure anymore. Parents don't let them. Like there's that. That's my point.
Yeah.
Right. Like everyone who literally can do anything that is that it shows not even any talent. They don't have to show any talent. Like you at some point you are urged to pick one. Yeah. Whether you show talent or not, because this is the one that's going to get you the scholarship. I have friends who I love who are like-minded, who have their kids playing sports they don't even like because there are better chances of getting scholarships with those sports than X sport. There are too many people play that sport, and there is no space anymore for people who just love to play.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, even
there's no, I have really one of my best friends a few years back lived in Chicago and was going to spend the summer here for work. And her son is 12. And she said to me, he'd love to try soccer. And it blew me away because I'm like, there's nowhere where a 12-year-old can try soccer. in New York.
Start out. Yeah.
It's like, no, there's no way. Are you kidding? He'd be killed anywhere that he goes.
He'd feel very out of place.
Like, you know, on their road to the Olympics. So
Right.
there's no, you know, that's the part. Like there should be a space for kids who are athletic and love being athletic and love sports to play several sports and maybe not want to be an Olympian, you know?
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah. Even just thinking this weekend. So there's a clinic this weekend, or actually no, the Sunday after Thanksgiving. Freya Coombe, who's the coach of Sky Blue FC, is doing a clinic in the city for girls. And I so wanted to bring my daughter, but I know that she's not going to be at the same level as those kids because she is actually playing for the school. She's more of a, actually, you know, in that way, they do have a rec option at her school. It's more of an intramural option. But you know, I actually said to myself, well, I don't want to put her in a position where she feels uncomfortable because she's, you know, she's 16 years old. And she's not going to be competing at the level, you know, she's not going to be at the level that the other girls are at. So I actually thought, oh, I guess I won't bring her. So you're right. That, you know, that's sad for her. And then on the other side of the of here in our house is my son, who was playing for a U.S. Soccer Development Academy here in Queens. And you know, like you're saying, they're practicing 4 times a week with games on the weekend. And the rule was that if you miss one practice, you lose your starting spot, no matter what. It didn't matter if you had a school play. It didn't matter if you had a big test. It didn't matter if you were sick. There was no excuse. If you missed a practice, you could, you know, so kids were playing.
How old was he?
He was 12. So guess what happened? He quit.
Yeah.
You know,
and I think this is one of those things so when we were sort of mentally putting together the world record last summer, right? Like the goal was that mass participation thing, because I think that is a really big barrier in access for girls and women to sport. And there's a whole psychosocial background to that, but we don't want to be bad. We are, like, you know, there's a competitive streak, but also a little bit of that self-esteem and pride. And like, if the idea is that you've got to be really, really good in order to participate, then at least in the women's side of the game, I think that's been a huge issue. Like not just the cultural expectations, not just the physical resources, but even when you have a shot, if you don't feel like you're good enough, if you don't have the confidence or feel like you can ask for help or get extra pointers from your coach or whatever, then that is, I think that's been a really interesting barrier for girls and women into sport overall, but certainly into a team sport game as well, depending on, you know, sort of where you fit in the hierarchy.
I don't know if you notice in sports for development, and I know you said you work in a lot of different countries. You know, I always, you know, I also work a lot in sports for development, and I one of the things that I always say, especially when it has to do with the United States, you know, is that I think sports needs a rebranding, right? And you know, we need to sort of people need, in order for us to be able to use it to its full potential, right? As a tool for development, as a tool for diplomacy, I think that we need to sort of move away a little bit from the hugely competitive aspect of it, and go back to what sports means at its core, right? Right. The things that sports are really, I mean, it's a joy, you know, playing. I mean, you're playing a sport, like we completely erase that word, the meaning of that word, you know. But I think that that's, you know, it's one of the things that I would love to see, especially for young people, to be able to, you know, spend it's hard to spend a lifetime in sport, you know, because there's a cutoff of who's going to the Olympics and who isn't.
Right. Or even in our town, it's who's going to get to play in high school. There's not even, you know, Right.
And I always have a hard time with that because I tend to think of myself as a player first, like played my whole life. I am a competitor. I love it. I love that sort of drive to continue to become excellent and to strive for excellence. But that isn't the whole picture. And I think that if we lose sight of that element of what else sport is doing for you, like why else are you participating? Well, it gives you social skills and you learn how to communicate and be a responsible person. And there's just, as well as sort of the positive attributes of like, here's a part of your day. I don't know about you guys, but playing or having that escape moment was my sanity moment. Everything else can follow. Hour on a pitch with a ball and some people that I respect and care about, and we have a game. I think that, and maybe like with 2020, that's honestly been the thing that I've missed the most. Like I've never gone this long without a game. I've never gone this long without having a team to really sort of exercise our collective joy with. I really do wonder, and I think that's an interesting question now as well for the women's game and coming out of 2020, and what do we want it to look like, right? And I think that there's where these fundamental questions of opportunity, equality, and respect, what do any of those things mean in a post-2020 environment at an elite level of competition, or much more at grassroots and participation? And are we equipping ourselves with the right tools and wide enough perspectives to get at the meat of some of these problems? Because I think there will be a challenge, series of challenges to sort of continuing to push this agenda, and what that agenda should even look like anymore. Because like in the U.S., where you have sort of the historical precedence of a successful team, of growing the game, of making it a banner for women's equality in sport overall and women's equality overall, to seeing how things are shifting within Europe and in some of the other regions that we look at, like the number of teams now they're talking about equal pay, and how do we make that work, and what does that represent? And anyway, I'm not really making a lot of sense right now. There's a lot of like little nuggets around these conversations that are ripening, right? We're sort of
I think you're right. They're ripening, and and I'm sure I think you'll agree. And I know Kely and I have seen, even just since we started working on our film, just in the last couple of years, the social media networks and the community that's focused on this issue, growing opportunities, growing respect, and working on equality around women's sports in general, is tightening and growing. And and I think we're all kind of looking at it from a different perspective, and we're all like collaborating and coordinating. And even now, even today, right, with Dina, it's the first time I had thought about, are women playing soccer in Bahrain? Like just days like what you guys have put together. So inspiring. I literally just got chills thinking about it. Because those are important moments for all of us. And it goes back to storytelling, and it goes back to hearing other people's perspectives. And, these things are so important to make people aware of what needs to change, what the status is now, and what, where we need to go next.
And I think that's been one of my favorite components of Equal Playing Field, besides being able to reconnect with the game I had very begrudgingly given up when I picked a different sort of job trajectory, was the tightness of this family, right? And I like to say that the expression used to be, oh, it's a small world in women's football. It's like, yes and no, because I actually think it's a growing world, but we're still tight. Like the ability to jump between these different nodes of passion and experience and dedication to what you're working on, it's still very close. We still all are able to sort of tie into each other's momentum. And I get very excited about the idea that we're looking at just sort of like deepening the mass right now. Like we are getting more, or it's a gravitational pull thing now. Like we have enough couple key individuals who are not going to take no for an answer, and we are finding different ways around sort of the various challenges in place. And all the time, it's being able to look at this, not just the individual resilience that you start to build out from these teams, but it's like, oh, I got a team again. This is a very dedicated team, and it's got a bigger cause in mind that has been, I think, one of the most transformational aspects of women in sport, and the stories that are being told, and the role that individuals like you have been able to give voice to all of these different women who, when we talk like in the sport for development world or in travel, where you see, oh, what are the challenges that you face? They're like, well, here's the laundry list of culture, religion, resources, institutional structures, etc. Watching how it manifests in different ways,
right,
and realizing that, oh God, I'm not alone
Yes.
in this specific challenge that I'm trying to overcome, right? One of the key takeaways that we had from the Kilimanjaro experience was that, there's a team of crazies out there. I am not the only person in my world.
Yes.
And it was nobody. Anyway, I think that that's my favorite side of what I've seen in women's sport for the last 2 decades in particular, is how much there is a coalition of battle-tested advocates for what these dialogues should be and the issues at hand. And I think that's pretty exciting. And then again, I reflect on Dina right now. She's like, oh, I'm going to take that world record and I'm going to smash it. I'm going to decimate it, because this is what I can do in this moment that is going to help give me a lift, my team a lift, the causes and that I'm working on is really, she's grown this club from scratch. It used to be 1 girls team and now there's 7, again, in a country and culture where it's not really an expectation. And she's been able to do that, having played for England and now changed for a different national team. And I'm awe-inspired by basically everyone that I come into contact with in this realm.
Yeah, it's very cool. Which is, I think, another, the I guess further effect of what you're saying, further benefits of having this, is the growing sort of core, is also that what I noticed, I think Susie also, is that, you're opening up conversations about these things with people who otherwise would not be thinking about it at all, and allowing for questions that are pretty valid, right? The difference between equality and equitable treatment, right? And what does it mean, which is so huge and so important. And what does equal pay mean? I get that so much when I speak, about football and equal pay and equity. And, I get a lot of very good questions about, like, do you really expect to get, Neymar's salary? Right. Which I love that question.
Yeah, that's a great question.
Really, it's a great question. And I'm like, you know what? You're absolutely right. And I think this is one of the big and very sort of one of the big misconceptions that works against the fight for equality and equity, because I think people don't understand what that means, and so I love getting that question. I love getting into it and saying, of course not. No one but Neymar should have a salary. He should have a salary.
And honestly, we would ask a few questions about why Neymar has that specific salary.
Yeah, exactly. But also, it doesn't. It will. But the other thing that I love to say all the time is there's enough money for everyone. There really is. Like, we should all want to share, but honestly, seriously, no one needs to share. There's money. Like, no one's asking for Neymar's money. I love him to death. I want him to keep his money, triple it. There are people. There's. It does not affect anyone, and it's not. Nobody's asking for Neymar's salary. Everybody understands why Neymar gets a salary, or begins to understand in some sort of context.
Right.
But it's about having, it's about equity. It's about getting paid for what you do. And it's not, and it's a really important conversation that I feel like we're having more and more and more, and I think that's great because. Because I think it's just the more people who don't really even think much about sports or football or women's, equality and human rights, we'll have this conversation.
Clearly not within that perspective, right? It's like, oh, that's a topic that I've heard about. I'm going to put it in a little box and I'm going to put it over there.
Exactly.
I'm not really going to engage with it until.
And it's beyond that, it gets dismissed because it's like, oh, okay, you're not going to get equal pay. Like, it's not an equal revenue. The sport doesn't create equal revenue. You're not going to get equal pay. Right. So it's great to break it down and to be able to. I wish there was a more specific, slogan than equal pay, but it's a pretty good one. And
at least everybody stops. They're like, what exactly are you talking about?
Yeah, exactly.
Please send it to me. And you have about a 45-second interval to get them or not, and then you build on that 45 seconds.
Exactly. But I think our world is getting bigger, and I like that. We said this when we started doing this project, is that what we wanted to see was like a snowball effect, right?
Right.
And I think that you are getting that. I think because it's getting the movement's getting bigger. what is the name of the new team in Angel City?
Angel City.
I'm so excited about that. I'm excited about people in entertainment getting involved and having conversations started. I mean, I think that's super exciting, you know. It also gives a certain, it lets people understand that it is somewhere that they want to be, which means that there's definitely something, we got something here. You know what I mean? It's not something to be dismissed. It's a big opportunity to bring attention to it.
And
Yeah,
you guys, sorry,
seen,
Susie, go ahead.
Sorry?
No, go ahead. I
feel like we've seen that a lot where, you know, you reach like a tipping point and, you know, you almost need, it's like a tipping point. It's like a chicken or the egg, right? You need somebody, you need that first, like, you need that first wave of non-soccer believers to believe and kind of like put us over the edge and, you know, get us, you know, on the downhill slope of things. And and I think this, you know, we keep thinking the World Cup is going to be that, right? They thought it in '99. They thought, you know, every 4-year cycle, they think that we've reached it and we've hit the downward slope and then it kind of dials back. But you know, this could be it. 2022 with the Angel City coming and the momentum is still going. I mean, I kind of worry every time I see them in the news, and then I think, okay, well, maybe that was the peak, you know. And
but it's not. Let this not be the last time. Please let us
know. I think we haven't even gotten started, and I think it's about the cross-pollination of entertainment.
Yes,
really, that's going to get, you know, as in terms of a sport that we want to watch as a culture in this country, right? I mean, other countries, but I think here it's really, I mean, a lot of our entertainment is about cross-pollination. I think if you look at media in the United States,
and a lot of our change is about cross-pollination, right? And this is a conversation that I think it again comes back to the efforts that you guys are putting forward. It's like you see what you believe, fundamental, hands down. If you see women as president of a country, if you see women as a CEO, if you see a mom who's also an athlete, and you know, like if you see it, you begin to believe that it's real. And to have entertainment finally start, you know, the wider media public space start to get on board with what you communicate by what you put out. And I think I like to refer back to looking at how, you know, the change in racism in sport, the change in dialogue around homosexuality, and, you know, is it okay? Like TV is what changed that. Sport is what changed the public acceptance and normality of the other, coming into a space that's important to you. And I think sport, for so many reasons, is this perhaps most powerful space to do that, because deep down sports fans are really sports fans. Like they love the game, they like to win, they like the community, and they want people on the field who give them the best shot on the one hand, but also what those individuals being on the field and being in a position of sort of respected authority in sport translates to them, right? I love the idea that, you know, you watched the women's national team jerseys now are selling out at a much higher rate than men's games around specific competitions, right? Just really sort of small little indicators of like, no, there's a generation of people now who are growing up in a space where it is completely normal for a female coach to coach a female team with all female pundits, and the entire world is watching. Right. And they're listening to what they have to say, and they're picking up the books and so forth. And that's where I think the next couple years, give or take, is going to be a really interesting space. Is that, can we take this collective agreement that this is an important issue, and that more sectors and more sort of pieces of the puzzle are joining in the same space? Does that really get us over the tipping point? I still think to go, but
and that's that amazing, like the whole stadium chanting equal pay was a pretty amazing thing, because, you know, I think it's all about, you know, seeing it. It seems trivial, but you're right. It's entertainment, it's television, it's things, you know, it's the small thing that for whatever reason in your world starts to plant the seed that starts to dismantle the subconscious bias, right? It's a little seed, like a little crack in the door that you can stick your foot in, and then you can start like letting some more information like spill in, and you don't, you know, and I do. And I think all of a sudden you have a whole stadium chanting equal pay, who you weren't even aware many were
knew that that's why you were there, but
exactly.
So in the final question before I release you guys back to your very busy lives, do you have any like pivotal penalty memories, be they penalties that you had to take, or that you watched on screen, or like, is there something about the penalty experience that you can share with the world today?
I will step up. It's funny. I didn't score a lot of goals at Harvard in college, but one of the goals that I scored was a penalty kick, and it never changes. Like, you walk up there and it's just nerve wracking. I mean, you're just full of butterflies. You're shaking. It doesn't matter if it's like you and your brother in the backyard. It's just a thing. Like, it just makes you nervous, it's one of those things that it's just a metaphor for life, right? Like, if you put in the time, you can be told as a kid that you have to practice, you have to practice, you have to practice, you have to get good at it, you have to find your spot. It needs to become muscle memory, right?
Right.
But you don't really put in the work when you're young. You don't really do it, right? You step up and you're like, I can do it. And then as you get older and you reflect back on it, you're like, oh my God, like, it is one of those things that you really can practice and drill into you. I mean, I can tell from watching Dina do the penalties today, she can take them with her right and her left, no problem. I mean, she is drilling them up, like up, down, wherever she wants. Clearly, she's taken a million of them in her life and practiced, and can probably hit the crossbar at will. And so I do think it's sort of a really important reflection on one of those big life lessons that sports teaches you. That, if you put in the work and you put in the effort, it can get a lot easier. It's still going to be nerve wracking. You're still going to get those butterflies, but your muscle memory hopefully will kick in. And, 80% of the time, 70% of the time, you'll at least get it on net. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's great. How about you, Kely?
All right. I have two.
Okay. Perfect.
One was, and they're not I didn't play soccer, but one was the penalty that Baggio missed in the 1994 World Cup. I don't want to be excited about like somebody's, sadness and failure, but I was there and it was pretty magical. And the other one, for a much more like, for me, like lovely and the gift that keeps on giving is Brandy Chastain, right? And I'll tell you why it keeps on giving, because I have a 9-year-old who, for a long time last year, our family show that we watched together was Fresh Off the Boat. And I don't know if you've ever seen that show.
That's a great show. Yeah, okay. I enjoy that.
And this is what we're talking about, that, media and representation and, planting the seed. So many amazing women were. Fresh Off the Boat is one of the most amazingly feminist shows. I really love that show so much. So Billie Jean had an entire sort of a storyline there, which is why my 9-year-old knows who Billie Jean King is and thinks, knows she's an awesome tennis player. But also Brandy Chastain had an entire. She had a whole episode where she became the young boy's like the object of his affection, because he saw that on TV, and then he had a poster of her with and she was one of the characters. She came back as a guest, but and so my 9-year-old, before the World Cup even, exactly who Brandy Chastain is, and knows exactly about that World Cup moment and the poster, and so I love that. That's pretty special.
And I think that really like both of you have touched on where I think the penalty is one of the most character building, personality. Like, it is like, you look at a penalty, you don't even have to know anything about football. You don't have to know anything about soccer. You look at a penalty being set up and you understand what the point is. You understand that this is going to be really hard, the psychology behind it. It's, and that it's an internal war and a sort of externally facing war, and the sense of pressure and expectation that comes with that. And I think that's one of the reasons when we talked about before setting up Dina's world record this year, I was like, oh man, what a great world record for 2020.
Yes.
Perfect. Done. Like, anybody who has sat in quarantine or felt isolated from the rest of the world or unable to accomplish those many goals that they had set for the rest of the year, here is something that speaks to everybody. And I also like the chance to just reflect on, I mean, I've also been a penalty taker. I don't like to do it. I normally am the first kicker off the spot. My numbers are in the positive percentage, but it's still that it's that moment of like, how's my aim today? Like, how's my follow through today? Do I have what it takes? Am I going to let my team down? Right. And no, but it's a really, I love how human it is. I love how human a moment a penalty kick is for you as a striker, you know, your opposition. Yeah.
It's very charged, right? As a fan, I don't know anybody who likes the penalties, right? It's like it's unfair. It's like, you know, you play, you know, it's a very sort of, it's seemingly arbitrary decider after, you know, sometimes a very hard fought match where, you know, sometimes there's even a clear better team who now it's all like, you know, for naught because but yeah.
Oh man. And oh man, that was one of my rage moments. I think when we spoke at the very beginning, and this will be the last story before I literally leave us, was I was playing in the Norway Cup as a youth team player coming out of Saudi Arabia. They used to call us the UN team because we were every color of the rainbow and we'd show up in black and white kit. And we were considered too young to deal with the stress of a penalty shootout. So they counted the number of corner kicks that were taken, and the team that had the most corner kicks was awarded the forward advancement. And we were 12 and under girls, and we were livid. I was like, that is not okay. That we like to fight for our opportunity. Like if we lose on penalties, then we lose on penalties. Don't take corner kicks. Like that's just not no. But what that was,
which is so. I'm sorry, but this is so. It would have to absolutely be a man, right, who has decided that any girl in the world, any girl in the world cannot stand the stress of pretty much anything.
And it was one of those little things now that I reflect back, like, okay, those moments in your career, your life, where you had a moment of realization about the gender question. And that was it, because obviously the 12 and under boys were allowed to take penalties. Or like, no, not okay. But ladies, thank you so much for your time. I really, really appreciate the chance to chat with you. I hope we get to do this more often. I'm really looking forward to the documentary. And again, from Equal Playing Field and all of the people who are going to be watching this material, you are amazing, amazing pillars of forward thinking and motivation. So thank you so much.
Wow, thank you. Thank you guys for everything you do.
All right, and I'm going to end the broadcast so that who is next? Actually, I don't even know right now. Oh, it is a conversation from goalkeepers. So I think this is the first public goalkeeper roundtable that has ever been done.
Wow.
So I look forward to watching. Take care, everybody. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.